set it up. So anyway, yeah, you're my backup. Thank you, Pat. Okay. Well, thanks to all of you for being here today. And today we're coming to celebrate. It's been a tough couple of years with COVID, and the economy has suffered. Many families have suffered. We're finally starting to turn the corner in terms of employment, economic activity, wages finally for the first time in a couple of decades are moving up. But what we're going to talk about here today is going to drive that process even more. So this is exciting. Earlier this year, the House passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I call it the fifth because it's easier to remember. So I call it bipartisan infrastructure, whatever the F stood for. But anyway, I'm here with Senator Wyden, who played a key part in that and can play an even much more key role in the second part of this agenda, which is critical for working families and Americans, which is the Build Back Better agenda. And as chair of the Finance Committee, he's going to be right at the epicenter of getting that bill done, and we'll get more of that later. I can hear from Senator Wyden after me, then from Lane County Commissioner Heather Buck, who's going to talk about the wildfire, SRS, and broadband. And EWEB Commissioner Sonia Carlson is going to talk about grid renewables, EV charging, and then we're going to hear from two apprentice sheet metal workers, the Smart Local 16, Cesar Salazar and Anna Van Elberdeen, who are going to talk about their careers with family wage jobs, which is going to be, we're going to create one heck of a lot of with this bill. I've dedicated my whole career on what started with Public Works and now called Transportation Infrastructure Committee to the issue of rebuilding and building out America's transportation systems. In the last Congress, my committee passed out the INVEST Act, which would have been the largest single investment ever. Actually, a bit more than we're ending up with here. We went through a real legislative process, took days in committee, on the floor, hundreds of amendments, including Republican amendments. We passed it out. Trump couldn't do anything with it and get it done with the Senate. And then we passed it out again this year, and I think we drove the process in the Senate. We set a very high bar. They reached our numbers on bridges and highways. They didn't get to our numbers on transit. They didn't get to our numbers on rail. And unfortunately, the 10 conservative Republicans and 2 conservative Democrats who wrote the bill, did not put in some of my most important provisions on dealing with climate change, because at least 11 of them are climate deniers. But we're still working on that. There are provisions in this bill that will deal with that, and there's going to be more provisions to come. Now, this is the largest single investment in infrastructure in the history of the United States of America. It exceeds what we did over 3 decades with the Eisenhower, National Highway Program, which started as the National Defense Highway System. And this includes, bridges, highways, transit, rail, water, broadband, our ports, our airports. Our ports, things take a long time in Washington. Ron can tell you that. I can tell you that. We've been there a long time. Finally, last December, after 25 years, I freed up the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund with $10 billion of taxes that are paid sitting in the Treasury to rebuild our ports. And in this district, Coos Bay, Oregon, which now is under contract to become a container port, needs those investments so that they can move forward with that investment and finally revitalize that community with good jobs, family wage jobs in Coos Bay, Oregon. First, talk real quickly about the national impacts, then the state impacts, and then we'll move on from there. Bridge investment, they included a very substantial bridge program, which is pretty much came from the INVEST Act I passed in the House. We have 42,000 bridges on the national highway system that need repair replacement. Remember, these are jobs that can't be exported. They're going to be done with material, manufactured in the U.S. Or is it concrete? U.S. concrete, and workers who are U.S. workers. These are family wage jobs, and they mirrored my new programs to invest more federal money into rural America. I represent a district that is substantially rural. The federal highway program for years has overlooked rural needs for bridges, small bridges, rural needs for local roads. They were excluded under this bill. The President's promise of 500,000 EV charging stations across the United States of America. No more range anxiety. And then when we get the provisions in the Build Back Better that Senator Wyden will be shepherding through the Senate, with provisions to give substantial tax incentives to people to be able to afford electric vehicles, they're going to be less reluctant to buy them because they'll be able to drive and commute and move around with their family the same way they can today easily, but without using fossil fuels. Those are critical investments. That deals with climate change. Projects of national and regional significance. Again, substantially copied from my bill, which potentially will include the critical Columbia River crossing here between Oregon and Washington State, something that's long overdue. Carbon reduction. It requires carbon reduction emissions. It doesn't have my mandatory provisions, but I'm in the Build Back Better. I'm going to have a $4 billion incentive program. So after they adopt their carbon reduction emission plans, even though it isn't mandatory like in my Invest Act, they can't get at the $4 billion of federal grants unless they meet those targets and have meaningful plans to move forward. Again, dealing with climate change at the same time as we're rebuilding America. Safety, I just saw shocking statistics. We had the worst year since 1971 for highway fatalities and pedestrian fatalities in this country. We are at the bottom of the trough. We are right down there with Russia and Mexico in terms of deaths per 100,000, more than twice any other developed country around the world. We're going to have complete streets, redesign and investments in America, and vehicle technology that's going to require vehicles to not, with following or with side collisions and that, to prevent that. So those are all things that are in this bill. For Oregon, $3.4 billion for highways, $268 million for bridges. That's about $65 million more a year because of provisions. I got the bill, again, it takes a long time, 15 years ago in the Safety Lou bill that changed the formula for Oregon. We used to be what was called the don't-eat state, sent more money to the feds than we got back. Back then when we were using gas tax, we started getting back more, and that continues to this day. That's not insignificant in a state like Oregon. $747 million for public transportation, $529 million for water, wastewater. I got an award last week from the National Utility Contractors Association. It's called We Dig America Award. They talked about every $1 billion we put into wastewater, and we have massive wastewater needs in our state and around the country, creates 20,000 family wage, Davis-Bacon, mostly union jobs. Every billion. This bill contains billions of dollars, both in the Build Back Better and then supplementing the money that was in the original bipartisan bill. EV charters, and this we will hopefully in the House send the bill to the Senate next week, which is the second part. Part 2, August, will begin to pay their fair share. The other provisions that are coming out of my committee are a new transit program to access affordable housing, a partnership between Housing Urban Development and Federal Transit Administration. We're going to put a lot of money into investment for affordable housing in America and Build Back Better. $10 billion for high-speed rail, $4 billion, as I mentioned, for greenhouse gas reductions, $4 billion for equity, critical up in Portland, where we're talking about undoing the highway building craze of the past and dealing with the issue of the Pearl District and rejoining that community that was split asunder in other communities across America. A new program, $5.25 billion for Economic Development Administration under my committee's jurisdiction, targeting communities that are chronically depressed. and giving them new tools and investments and help with pre-development and then actual grants and development to rebuild their economies. And $2.5 billion, as I said earlier, for wastewater, and it's going to include provisions that deal with issues like Heather could address about Blue River. Trying to rebuild Blue River, many of them were on what are not compliant septic systems. They needed a community system, and because of the rescue package, Oregon was able to fund that with Brian Kleb's help through the legislature, and they're going to have a wastewater system that will serve that community, serve it better. And my bill, or these provisions in the Senate, will provide money all across America for like that for communities that need it, septic improvement. Now, we move on now to the second speaker, the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, the man who's going to shepherd the provisions through for Build Back Better. It'll see that it's fully paid for, not inflationary, and not raising taxes on anybody earning $400,000 a year. Our senator, the senior senator from Oregon, Senator Ron Wyden. Let's give it up once more for Peter. What an amazing job. What an amazing job, Peter, in terms of transportation. And I'm going to make this a filibuster-free zone. By the way, we're going to push really hard, folks, to get an exception to the filibuster rule so we can pass voting rights in America. Long overdue. What Peter and I are here to tell you is you just cannot have big league job growth with little league infrastructure. And the bill that is going to be signed Monday, and we're going to be there, is going to make sure that there is a new lifeline for so many hard-hit rural communities in this state and around the country. Now, Peter laid out the transportation issues very well, and let me touch on three that are going to be signed into law Monday that are special priorities of mine. The first involves what's called collaborative forestry. This is where you get the industry folks and the environmental people and the community leaders together. What it's going to mean for us is the opportunity to do more prescribed burns. And these prescribed burns, where you go in there when the weather is cooler and you're careful, one of them basically saved the town of Sisters a couple of years ago. So that's number one when we talk about collaborative forestry. Second, everybody will identify with in a hurry, and that is my Disaster Safe Power Grid Act is going to mean that rural utilities in this community are going to be able to install power lines underground. They're going to have fast tripping sensors. And we aren't going to have so many of the horrible safety and fire risks that we had during the bad storms that everybody remembers. And then third, that I championed, and I want to thank Heather for her great work on this, is $100 million for broadband in Oregon. Now what this means is when you have a spouse working at home, you have a kid trying to stay in touch with the school, say they've got a little bit of flu or something like that, and telehealth, we're going to be in the big leagues in terms of telecommunications. And Heather has championed this for ages, and we are very appreciative of it. It builds on the program, as you know, Heather, that I got in the spring that the president signed into law. I do want to spend a minute talking about what comes next, because as Peter said, Build Back Better and the roads and bridges really have a connection. A woman came up to me in Fred Meyer the other day and she said, you know, Ron, I love the roads and bridges, but if I don't have child care, I'm not going to make it to the bridge. So these things are very much related.
And I'm going to talk about 3 areas that I've focused on. One, Peter and I have been working for ages to make sure that medicine is more affordable and seniors don't get mugged at the pharmacy counter. This bill, which I largely wrote in the Finance Committee, isn't everything that Peter and I would have wanted. But let me give you the key provisions because it's going to become law. First of all, we are going to be able to negotiate, starting with the most expensive drugs, the cancer drugs, the arthritis drugs, the most expensive drugs. We are lifting the curse of non-negotiation, because that's what it was. It was like a curse. It's going. Second, we've got thousands of Oregonians who depend on insulin. They may have diabetes, they may have one or more conditions. Starting in 2023, under something I insisted on, Medicare and the health plans, the private plans, are going to cap insulin costs at $35 a month, and that is going to be a huge win for so many in Oregon. Then there are the anti-price gouging provisions. And what we saw last year is more than half of the drugs went up more than inflation. Under what I put in this bill, they go up more than inflation. They pay penalties. There will be anti-price gouging consequences for the first time in American medicine. A couple of other points coming up under my Clean Energy for America bill. Peter was very involved in this. We took the tax code on energy and we threw it in the trash can. Just threw it out. It was just a relic. And in the future, the tax breaks go, if you reduce carbon emissions, you get bigger tax savings. And that's for transportation, that's for energy efficiency, that's for clean energy. And you better believe Peter and I are going to be working with transportation sources, energy sources, and others, because if ever there was a place that wanted to reward carbon emissions, this is the state where it makes sense. Now, 2 other provisions, and then I'm going to hand this over to Heather. We've got some important incentives that are going to be in the House bill and the Senate bill to promote manufacturing. You know, we know, for example, that this country shouldn't be dependent on chips. And this has been so important for the Oregon economy. That's no longer going to be the case with that provision. And I'll wrap up, because you're going to hear a little bit about it over the next few weeks, is some may think that this isn't important. But I'll tell you, I think billionaires in this country should finally pay their fair share of taxes. And believe it or not, they can avoid it just by saying they're not going to take a wage. They don't take a wage, so they put all their money in their stock account. It just goes up and up. And to give you an idea how much money is involved, the taxation people said my proposal will raise about $570 billion over 10 years. It'll be the biggest single tax provision. 754 billionaires made $2 trillion during the 18-month pandemic. So this isn't going to be hard for them. We can show that success and paying your fair share goes hand in hand. And that's what we're going to do, and you're going to hear a lot about it. And there are going to be all kinds of people who are going to say, oh, there's going to be, Western civilization is going to end if billionaires pay their fair share. Not so. It's not something that is going to cause us problems. It's consistent with our notion of fairness, being in it together. It's not going to hamper success, and it'll make it possible for all the good investments that all of these wonderful people are talking about to be paid for with a sense of fairness going into the future. And if ever there was somebody who understood at the local level the value of promoting success and doing it with a strong sense of fairness, it's our next speaker. Please welcome Heather Buck.
Thank you, Senator Wyden, Congressman DeFazio. Let's give it up for Senator Wyden. My name is Heather Buck. I'm a Lane County Commissioner for East Lane, District 5, and also South Lane. And we have with us several other elected officials with us I'd like to recognize. We have Senator Brzezinski, Senator Manning, Representative Nathanson. We also have some folks from LTD and ELEV if you want to raise your hand. Thank you. My district runs from Cottage Grove up to Oak Ridge and up the McKenzie River region. I want to first express my deep gratitude and thanks to Congressman DeFazio for leading the congressional discussion on what infrastructure is, and to Senator Wyden for his role in leading the congressional discussion on how to pay for what infrastructure is. On a broader note, it was really nice to see the bipartisan nature of votes in both chambers for support of this legislation. When I look at this bill, with its emphasis on water, roads, broadband, and natural disasters, each of these items are exceedingly important to my constituents in rural Lane County. My expectation of this bill will be that it improves the lives of rural residents in Lane County. I have a few examples of how I see that playing out. With the $100 million of broadband funding coming to the state, rural Lane County residents have struggled with connectivity, and we should see that investments made will ensure phone and internet services are more equal to what urban residents enjoy, while also improving the security of these systems overall. With significant increases in grant programs for transportation projects and the reauthorization of the Secure Rural Schools, thank you, Senator Wyden, for 3 additional years, rural roadway maintenance and modernization projects will continue, and I'm particularly invested in ensuring road safety is enhanced. Additional policy elements to streamline project delivery are highly encouraged. Wildfire and other natural disaster funding encompassed under the broad description of resiliency will allow us to pivot to conversations and projects that address prevention activities. As a community leader, I would much rather we invest in protecting what we have than through the heartbreak of response and recovery. I want to applaud the new investment for water-related projects. I have never been so thankful for a rainstorm that we've seen recently, but in reality, we know that summers are hotter, drier, and longer than we've ever known, and new water funding will allow us to focus on protecting existing drinking water and better evolve and maintain wastewater systems. We have several systems in rural Lane County that need upgrades in a dire way, and this will help that happen. Finally, I know my constituents will appreciate the Buy America requirements contained in the measure. While we do have a global economy, the recent supply chain issues have pointed out the need to invest in American manufacturing. And this bill is very clear that a suite of end products must be sourced and manufactured in the United States. Thank you, and I will introduce EWEB Commissioner Sonia Carlson.
today. I'm Sonia Carlson, Eugene Water and Electric Board Commissioner, and I applaud Congressman DeFazio and Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley, who's not here today, for leading the charge to develop and pass National Infrastructure Package, which is the largest federal investment tackling climate change. As a mother, I can deeply foresee the changes. Even my 10-year-old son asked me, "Mom, what's my future going to be like?" This is something that's deeply personal to all of us, so tackling climate change is the biggest challenge of our time, and making this investment is very real to each and every one of us. We see it every single day in our lives, fires and everything. We need a modernized power grid that will solve the challenges of the 21st century, a path to a clean energy future, and a grid resilient to extreme temperatures, wildfires, and flooding. This bill makes an unprecedented investment in the construction of thousands of miles of new transmission and distribution across the country, which is critical to expand renewable energy capacity and access. Imagine a future in the West where a modernized and more interconnected grid leverages resources and geographical diversity of Northwest hydropower, Southwest solar, and Montana wind. The bill makes investments in clean hydrogen, which EWEB believes will improve local resiliency, and decarbonization efforts by powering critical loads during emergencies and offsetting more carbon-intensive market purchases during times of peak demand. You know, we think of natural gas and the impact that it has. Clean hydrogen could actually offset some of that impact. We'd love to turn and make a market for our renewable energy and be able to store that excess renewable energy so that we can use that energy in times of peak demand. This is how we do this, with new investments in clean energy. In Eugene, thanks to EWEB's nearly carbon-free electricity mix, transportation is our largest local source of greenhouse gas emissions. Electrification of transportation is a major carbon reduction opportunity. This legislation will bring $52 million to Oregon, just to Oregon, to support the deployment of electric vehicle charging across our transportation corridors, making driving an electric vehicle for work or play worry-free, whether in town or in the beautiful wide open spaces of Oregon. Finally, I would be remiss if, as an EWEB representative and commissioner, I didn't mention that $529 million coming to Oregon to support water infrastructure. $529 million. This is a major investment in our water resources. It will ensure that our communities have continual access to safe, clean water. Thank you, Congressman DeFazio, Senators Wyden and Merkley, for your hard work to pass this monumental legislation. It truly is monumental. And now I'll turn it over to Cesar Salazar and Anna Van Elverdeen from the Apprentice Sheet Metal Workers.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cesar Salazar, and I'm an apprentice on SMART Local 16, an affiliate of Oregon State Building and Construction Trades Council. I'm here today on behalf of SMART Local 16 and the thousands of skilled built trades members across Oregon. We are excited to see the development that the new bill will provide for any apprentice. Infrastructure construction projects can last for their entire apprentice careers on one project alone. The need to not worry of work will bring security for their families and themselves. This bill will not only create jobs for Oregon's building trades members, but a pathway into registered apprenticeship and training programs for women and people of color all over the country. Coming from a non-union job, I have had the opportunity to notice distinctions between union and non-union employment. Differences like working conditions, benefits, and salary are some of many. No longer do I need to worry about the future that I can provide for my family. SMART Local 16 has shown me that I'm not just a number in their employment payroll, but I am a friend a brother, and a family member. I thank God that I was given this opportunity, and this investment is long overdue, and it has going to be a huge benefit to Oregon's building and construction trade members. We look forward to collaborating with all federal, state, and local stakeholders to help ensure this investment delivers what is intended to. Thank you all for your time.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anna Van Overding, and I am an apprentice with the Sheet Metal Workers of SMART Local 16, an affiliate of the Lane, Hughes, Curry, Douglas, and Oregon State Building and Construction Trade Council. My family has experienced the benefits of apprenticeship programs like the one I am enrolled in at the Sheet Metal Workers of SMART Local 16, as well as the union wages and healthcare benefits that I earn as part of my career. My father has been working as a member of the Sheet Metal Workers Union for the last 26 years. I've seen the life-changing benefits of union wages firsthand, and I know what it means to have a long-term career and education opportunities, like the ones this bill will bring to everyone across America for decades to come. This new infrastructure bill will help raise the standard of living for everyone in the building trades industry for generations to come. Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Thank you all. We'll draw it out. Now we'll be happy to take a few questions. It can be directed to either of us or any of the speakers.
One last point. The President is going to sign the bill Monday at 3 p.m. And so we're then going to be working together to get that money out all across our state to hard-hit communities.
Infrastructure. Amid a worker shortage, are you concerned about having enough workers to get that done?
Absolutely not. I was on a call earlier with some of the trades, and I said, you better get bigger space and gear up your apprenticeship programs. The unions are ready to take in the new workers, and you've already heard from the benefits that they're getting. We're seeing a lot of people abandon poorly paid, abused service jobs. And they're looking for a place to go where they can live the American dream, where they can buy a house, they can have a car, they can have a family, and they don't have to worry about putting food on the table, paying the rent, and all that. And these jobs, which are all going to be covered by federal Davis-Bacon, Oregon's Little Davis-Bacon, and hopefully predominantly union jobs, are going to deliver on that promise. I don't think we're going to have any problem recruiting people for these sorts of jobs. Ron, you want to hear that?
No, I think Peter and I both work on an area that we believe is critical infrastructure, and that's trucking. Because we've got Mike Card and others in Southern Oregon who are talking about these needs. So what Peter is talking about, I think, puts us really on the cutting edge of what we need for critical infrastructure like trucking. We are going to see those jobs get filled.
Other questions? That's
How do
pretty
you feel about the results of this bill in terms of climate change mitigation, and what will you be working for the next bill to achieve those commitments?
Well, I haven't made any secret that I found the BIF or the IIA, the fact that they left out my most major climate provisions. The bill was written by 12 senators, and at least 11 of them are climate deniers, so that's no big surprise. But they did include, as I said, states are going to have to adopt plans, but they put no teeth in it. Under the arcane rules of the Senate, following rules written by a senator again 12 years, written 28 years ago, I can't do that mandatory, but I can put $4 billion pot out there and say, okay, are you going to tell your people in your state or your city or your county that you don't want to meet these climate goals and you're going to be ineligible for this money to help rebuild your infrastructure in a way that is resilient and more climate friendly and less carbon intense, that's a big step. The other thing Ron mentioned about what we're going to do with renewable energy, I'll let him go on about that. The biggest provisions on climate change are going to come with Build Back Better. I'm going to let Ron address that.
Peter, thank you. And he and I have been working on these for years. Look, with the tax code historically, somebody would show up and tax breaks would be given out like lollipops. I mean, anybody who wanted one. That is all going to change under the law that I'm writing. It's got support already in the House, support in the Senate, and what it's going to be is the linchpin of our effort to get serious about climate. What we're going to say is the more you actually reduce emissions, that's the lodestar here. That's what Peter and I have worked for all these years. Actual, tangible, measurable, concrete judgments about reducing carbon emissions. The more you reduce them, the bigger your tax breaks. And more than $300 billion in the Build Back Better provision, which every Democrat, moderate and progressive, supported in the Senate Finance Committee, is going to go to this area. It is a very significant fraction of what the president wants to achieve in terms of his carbon emission proposals. And for the first time, and Peter, to his credit, worked for much bolder action in the BIF. For the first time, we're actually tying carbon emission reductions to some of these things like taxes and the future. That's how we're going to get serious about it.
And don't forget, Sonia already addressed this, the fact that grid reinforcement, and as she mentioned, it was really a good summary. We'll be able to wheel wind power from Montana. We've got our hydropower and then solar from the Southwest. Something now with the aged grid we have is not practicable, and it's another key provision that will help us with that. So when you make these two together, we are going to make huge progress toward climate change, but it will not end there. Secretary Buttigieg has $100 billion of discretionary money. And money of this is going to go into things called SIG grants, infra grants, a whole host of grant programs. And this administration is going to set the criteria for who's first in line and last in line to get those grants. And they're going to emphasize climate change and equity. And then they'll move on down the line from there. So there will be even more investment to come. Yes? Oh, wait. She had a question.
Sorry. I actually wanted to ask about that $100 billion from Secretary Buttigieg. Do we have any projects here in Oregon that are applying for that money?
Well, the Secretary and I had a brief conversation last weekend. He was on his way to Glasgow, but we talked about the SIG grants, the infra grants, the projects of national regional significance. Yes, I think that we will be lining up for some of those grants. We're right now pending a grant to deal with Franklin Boulevard over into Springfield, and that's under the current programs, let alone under these enhanced and better funded programs. I think you will find, and I will work closely with my communities, and Ron will work with the rest of the state, which he represents, to help them get in line for these projects in Oregon, and I certainly won't be shy about making my views known to the Secretary.
And in Portland, when you're talking about the Rose Quarter and what happened in Albina, when you're talking about Lents, for example, it was 115 outside my house this summer. It was closer to 120 in Lents because they didn't have any shade cover. So I can tell you, when it comes to the future, it's going to be central to Peter and I that these programs combine actual results in reducing carbon emissions with a focus on those kinds of communities that never got a fair shake. I mean, just picture the difference between Lents and one of the communities in Portland's Upper West Hills. We're glad they have shade, glad they have trees. We think those kinds of opportunities should be part of communities that aren't at the tippy top of the income scale.
That will come as Ron said, that will come through the $4 billion that I'm going to put into the equity in the Build Back Better, and the other billion that was in the original bill. And it'll also come with the new provisions on complete streets and redesigning the way these communities work, and then joining communities back together. And I expect we will rejoin those communities, in Portland with green space, just like has been done in a few other places in America. But now we will have the resources to do it. Yes, you had a second question.
Yeah, I want to ask about a little bit about supply chain issues, specifically at West Coast ports. Any plans to clear up those port backlogs?
Well, the president has already taken steps. I mean, the president has some job owning authority. He's already job owned the ports, those who control port infrastructure, to open the ports 24 hours a day, which they haven't been doing. He's worked with the ILWU and other unions to get them to agree that they'll put in more overtime to move goods out of those ports. There also is money proposed. There's significant port money in the BIF or the IIJA, but I'm putting more money into port infrastructure. It has been neglected for far too long, and that's why I spent 25 years freeing up the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund so that we can improve the efficiency of our ports, move the goods out more quickly, and move them out in a way without massive carbon pollution. There's Amtrak, we love that. We're putting a lot of money into Amtrak in this bill, let me tell you. But the fact is that the communities that have suffered the most from port pollution are low-income and minority communities near the ports. So we're going to be dealing with climate change. We're going to be dealing with pollution and health and efficiency with this additional money. It's not going to happen overnight, but the president's taking what steps he can now, and we're going to be taking more steps in the future to make us more efficient. We're lagging behind the rest of the world in our ports, as we are in almost every other aspect of infrastructure. That's going to change starting now.
Senator Wyden, you briefly mentioned preventative measures like prescribed burns when talking about mitigating climate events. How do you perceive the connection and relationship with indigenous tribes when going about this?
One of the judgments that I made when I looked at prescribed burns was the history. And nobody has put more effort and more time into doing prescribed burns right than the indigenous communities. They are really the reigning authorities, and I can get you the information on it, but that was really what tipped me, that the indigenous tribes that have been here for thousands and thousands of years were really the pioneers on prescribed burns. And by the way, there is a little bit more good news for tribal water systems. I was able to get my bill in the BIF, and I think it'd be fair to say, with the help of Senator Merkley and Congressman DeFazio, it won't be too much longer till we no longer see those boil water notices, and that is something that's long overdue. I'm also including provisions for my committee which go to the territories and the tribes who are not that well funded in the BIF. They did get some funding, but I'm going to put additional funds into tribes and into the territories to deal with these issues. Everything from wastewater, drinking water, lead pipes, to what Ron's talking about. And in terms of prescribed burning, Ron and I worked, must have been a quarter century ago, on the Healthy Forest Investment Act, HIFRA, and that has never been adequately funded. We're finally, we said to the Forest Service, the BLM, you've got to go out there and do prescribed burning. You've got to reduce fuels. We have what are called ladder fuels now, where you see old-growth ponderosas, which are totally fire-resistant, but they're not fire-resistant if they get a lodgepole that grows into their crown, which shouldn't even be there and wouldn't have been there had we followed the prescriptions that tribes have done for centuries. And we are now going to move ahead with those projects, with these investments, which will be
absolutely critical in reducing the intensity and the loss of resources we are suffering with fires today. All right, everybody, thanks very much. I appreciate you being here. Thank you.